Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of the Pangolin Podcast. I'm your host, Toby Jermyn. Thank you very much for joining me. In each episode, I've invited a professional wildlife photographer to imagine themselves in a remote location. And along with their camera gear, they're allowed to bring 5 photographs to hang on the wall of their humble dwelling. Now, 4 of these must be their own, and the final image is one they admire by another photographer. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the images as we talk, but for audio listeners on other platforms, there is a link in the description to a gallery. On today's show,
you could learn as much about your subject as you liked, and you could try and always think ahead, but ultimately you had no control over how, in this case, the great white shark would come flying out of the water. And on this particular day, this 4.5 meter huge great white shark must have leapt probably 10, 12 foot clear of the water there, completely inverted, but it jumped completely away from me.
My guest today is a world-renowned fine art wildlife photographer, conservationist, and Canon ambassador, best known for his groundbreaking Air Jaws images of great white sharks breaching off South Africa's Seal Island. For nearly 3 decades, he has worked in some of the remotest corners of the planet, crafting powerful images that sit at the intersection of art, natural history, and conservation. His photographs have fronted leading publications such as National Geographic and the New York Times, and his work has featured in major documentary series for Discovery Channel's Shark Week and BBC's Planet Earth, helping to reshape how the world sees apex predators and the wild places they depend on. He is, of course, Mr. Chris Fallows. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Toby. Lovely to be here, and hello, all the Pangolin listeners and viewers.
Well, thank you very much. I think you're the first person to have greeted the audience. There we go. And we're on episode 25 and you're the first person. So there we go. Thank you very much indeed. On behalf of all the listeners, thank you. So, Chris, where do we find you today? Where are you in the world?
Well, today I'm in beautiful sunny Cape Town. It's actually 31 degrees outside and it's one of those rare days we don't have wind. So savoring every minute.
So you don't have wind, it's 31 degrees, and yet you're now stuck indoors chatting to me when you could be out on the water.
I was going to say that, but yeah, I'm very happy to have this opportunity, so thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's nice to see you, at least virtually. I think our paths very rarely cross these days. In fact, I haven't seen you in ages, so it's lovely to see you, albeit virtually.
Likewise, Toby. Great to connect again, my friend.
Now, you've got a massive library of images. You've been photographing for 30 years. How easy or difficult was it to choose the 4 images for this show from your extensive library?
You know, I'm sure as any photographer who's been around for a little bit will tell you, it's very difficult. But the reality is you only take a handful of images in your life that really, I guess, are elevated above the rest. So obviously try to go into that pool. And then also trying to pick out a few images that have meaning, because a lot of what I'm doing nowadays is trying to use my images to inspire people and create works of art that do have meaning. So I kind of dug into those pools and selected from that archive.
And whilst we're on that matter as well, because you are not only highlighting the species that you're photographing, but you really are putting your money where your mouth is as well. A little birdie tells me you're in the process of purchasing a piece of land in Namibia to preserve it in perpetuity. Tell us about that. What's going on?
Yeah, so Toby, that's a very big part of what we're doing now. You know, I very humbly say that I've been gifted the most incredible life of, you know, I've been pretty much everywhere that I've ever wanted to go to see wildlife on the planet. And so many of the greatest highs in my life have been given to me by wildlife. And my wife, Monique, and I, we don't have kids. So our way of giving back is to try and give back to those creatures that have given us so much. So we're taking the funds that we accrue through the sale of our fine art, and we're buying land in southern Namibia. We've also bought in the southern Cape Coast. And essentially we're trying to add that to vast conservation corridors and create environments that allow the free movement of wildlife. So yeah, that's our vision with what we're trying to do now, trying to inspire people through our work, but then also directly on a personal level, use the funds to buy land, rehabilitate it, and hopefully ultimately rewild it.
That is a really, really commendable. I've always thought that there should be a stock image library of wildlife images where a percentage goes to the photographer and a percentage goes to the species that the photograph is of. Maybe that's
I
something we
love
should look
that.
at as well.
I love that. And I think in reality, all of us who've shot for many years, I think a percentage should probably go to the guides that so often put us in the right places at the right times. But undoubtedly, the real stars of the show are in front of the lens. And for me, yeah, it's a very small way in which I can give back.
Well, there we go. You heard it here first on the Pangolin Podcast. Okay, Chris, let's get on to your first image, please. Tell the listeners and viewers about this image.
So this is a photograph called The Final Act, and it was taken at Seal Island in 2016. And it is of one of the iconic flying great white sharks that was breaching there. And it's called The Final Act because it was really the last significant photograph I ever took of those incredible sharks after working with them for 24 years since we first discovered them there, spending over 3,500 days either on or in the water with them. And then that was the last time I ever had the privilege of taking an image of them. And it represents something that was very special. Those sharks became world famous. They were in hundreds and hundreds of documentaries. And at its peak, more than 100,000 people were coming to South Africa every year with their first purpose to see great white sharks. So the Seal Island great white sharks will always occupy a very, very special place in my heart. They are a large reason why I've been able to go and see and do the things I have in my life. And this image for me is a very powerful one in that it represents the end of what was an iconic era at Seal Island, and hence the name The Final Act, as though that animal is dancing on this stage-lit, beautiful environment for the last time.
It's an absolutely stunning image. But before we talk about how the environment changed and why you don't get to photograph these sharks anymore, let's go back to you firstly documenting and discovering this behaviour. When did that happen? Let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah, so that was 1996. I'd worked at a place called Dyer Island, which is close to Gansbaai. And for those who don't know from around the world, that's about 2 hours east of Cape Town. And I'd worked there for 4 years. And then as a guy in my very early 20s, I'd saved up a few pennies, enough to buy a 11-foot long rubber inflatable boat, which I wouldn't suggest is probably the best craft for looking for an animal with 250 very sharp teeth. But a friend and I headed out on an August morning in 1996. And we had recently been working on one of Sir David Attenborough's documentaries at Dyer Island, where I'd seen a guy at the Farallon Islands of San Francisco cast a surfboard off the rocks. And when he reeled the surfboard in, a great white shark came flying out the water after it. And it gave me the idea to try pulling a little roughly seal-shaped size decoy and seeing if the great whites would show interest. And we went out with the rubber inflatable boat, and I'll never forget, my friends at the time wouldn't allow me to take bait, as is the normal way of attracting great white sharks. So I said, well, let me put out a little decoy. And they asked me what the chances of getting a breach or seeing a shark were. And I said, well, probably less than 10%. Anyhow, to cut a very long story short, I paid out the line with the little life jacket attached. And not 30 seconds after I put it out, this small great white shark came flying out of the water, and we stared in disbelief. Great white sharks were cool, but a flying great white shark kind of took that to a whole new level. And the great white then went back into the water, spat out the decoy. By that stage, my friends were pretty much in pandemonium, wanting to head back to the shore. But as soon as I had the tiller and I was in control of the vessel, I said, guys, let's give it one more chance. And we tied on the decoy again. And then we towed it for probably about half an hour with nothing. And I thought, well, was that the greatest one-off in history? And then all of a sudden, a proper great white came flying out the water, around about 12 foot in length, so about 3.5, 4 meters. And it was incredible. Not only had we really discovered that there were white sharks at Seal Island in significant numbers, but they showcased a truly phenomenal behavior, and the penny dropped for us that, this was something pretty special. So that was really the start of everything. And yeah, it opened up an incredible, many decades long career of working with these iconic animals that we had day after day of once in a lifetime experiences. And it was such an incredible privilege.
It's extraordinary. It only really happens, though, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the topography of the ocean floor that has changed the behavior of the sharks. Is that correct? Because it comes very shallow, very deep, and then comes
Yeah,
up towards the island where the seals are.
100%, Toby. So there were four factors that came together, in terms of being a unique environment. The one, as you correctly identified, was the bathymetry, so the depth surrounding Seal Island. So the seals would concentrate in an area called the launch pad at the southern terminus of Seal Island. And then immediately, as they left that, they'd go over a deep water area. So it gave the sharks plenty of chance to remain camouflaged, and they would use an ambush-like attack. Then you had the right size prey. So at Seal Island, they were attacking young of the year Cape fur seals that were of a size that the sharks could hit at full speed, and that would take them clear of the water. Whereas in other locations where they're feeding on, let's say, northern elephant seals at the Farallon Islands, they used a different type of attack where they'd essentially try and bite off the hind flippers of the seal, let it bleed out before they would come in and attack it. And it certainly wouldn't have paid dividends to hit an animal that weighs more than you at super high speed. So you had the right size prey, the right bathymetry, then you had the right size shark. So the sharks at Seal Island were typically teenage, sub-adult, and young adult sharks. So in the prime of their lives, highly athletic animals, capable of these tremendous bursts of speed. And then the final ingredient was you used to have very high numbers of great whites. So it was also a very competitive environment. So all of those factors came together at Seal Island like nowhere else on Earth.
Now, you then turned this into, well, let's just say it was a business opportunity as well, and started operating shark watching tours, shark diving tours. That was a significant amount of your life doing that, wasn't it?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I'm a very passionate naturalist and have a tremendous love of animals. So when we discovered these incredible sharks, there was never a financial motivation at the time. And right off the bat, my partner at the time, Rob Lawrence, and I, we really struggled because we were caught in a conundrum of being essentially penniless guys in our early 20s and having discovered this incredible wildlife phenomena that we knew would attract the world's attention. I mean, great white sharks are front page stories. And for a long time, we used to kind of try and attract clientele, but we would vet our clients very carefully. And this was in the days prior to social media. So they would have to be sworn to secrecy that they couldn't tell anybody else what they had seen. And under those guidelines, they were able to come out with us. So you can imagine a business model that severely limits the amount of people that come out, and then they have to swear to do absolutely no marketing for you. But it worked pretty well, and we made a few pennies, enough to allow us to keep our love of seeing the sharks going. And then one particular client, I'll never forget, it was 1997. He came out there in those days with a little video camera, one of those ones you used to hold on your shoulder. And his name was Greg Watt, I can still remember. And Greg got a video of a shark breaching, and he went back to the US, and somehow or other it got back to National Geographic, and all of a sudden they tracked us down. And on the line I had National Geographic, and in those days it was with David Dubélé and Peter Benchley, the guy who wrote Jaws, and a couple of other very famous cinematographers and shark scientists. And we were kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because if we said, no, this behavior didn't exist, they had seen the video and they would come knocking and they would go out with somebody else. So we did decide to do that documentary. And yes, that kind of led to everything else. But at the same time, I'd always been interested in photography. My dad was a very keen amateur wildlife photographer. And from the age of 2, I was fortunate enough to be going off to the Kruger National Park and the Kalahari. And so not only had I developed a love of animals, but I really saw the beauty in what my dad was doing by allowing a photograph to allow us to relive those moments. So my dad gave me a Pentax camera, and to show you how little I actually knew about photography at the time, it was equipped with a zoom lens. And I went out on the first day. I never had a proper zoom lens in my life. I was used to pushing a button, right? And I took a breach photo, and it was okay. It was much better than I had done, but it was too far away. And then somebody pointed out to me, you just extend the barrel. So I always love telling that story for young kids who always think that you have to be so technically knowledgeable when you start photography. That the technical knowledge is important and it will come. But I think having the passion and the desire to be out there is the most important thing initially.
That's a lovely story, isn't it? Just failing. First of all, you've told the story of the world's first influencer who went back and told National Geographic. And then secondly, the very important lesson of don't forget to zoom when you've got the zoom. There we go. 2 life lessons in one. We haven't even moved to the second image yet. Okay, before we move on, let's explain to those people who don't know behaviours in False Bay have changed with the great whites as well. Just tell the viewers and listeners just briefly what's happened.
Yeah, so look, it's a very contentious matter, but my very firm belief is that the orcas that have been prescribed as being the main reason for the white sharks disappearing have actually got a very small part to play. And that anthropogenic causes like the Natal shark sport that kills on average nowadays 25 white sharks a year. They used to kill as many as 40 in the late 90s, so that already shows you the numbers were on their way down. Coupled to a fishery called demersal shark longlining, which targets smaller shark species that were one of the main prey of the white shark and also catches great whites. Together, the shark sport and the demersal shark longlining kill and have killed on average somewhere between 60 to 75 great whites a year. Whereas the orcas since 2017, when the first case of a white shark washed up with its liver missing was found, have only killed 10. I think any challenged mathematician can see where the problem lies. And what a lot of people don't realize is that just like any other apex predator, there were never a huge amount of great white sharks. At its peak, the population was estimated to be around about 1,279 animals along the South African coastline. So when you're losing close to 100 animals a year, that population can never in a million years sustain that. And sadly, the 2 orcas, port and starboard, have been blamed. But my personal opinion, and quite a few others out there, is that human causes have been and continue to be the biggest threat and reason for the white shark's decline and now disappearance.
There we go. Obviously not very clear cut, but thank you very much for sharing those insights. I'm hoping that somebody will do something about it. We can start, getting the population back up to strength again. Okay. Let's move on to your second image again, another image taken from a boat, I assume. Tell us about this image.
So this is a photographer called Leviathan, and we've told the sad news story about the great whites, and we're going to move on to something far more positive now, and this is of an incredible humpback whale, and it's taken on the west coast of South Africa.
It is a really startling image. Obviously, for those of you listening, you can just see the fluke, but it's the water falling off the fluke as well. So tell us about how you got this photograph. You're incredibly low in the water. Where were you? How did this happen?
Yeah, well, I think you've identified the critical feature of this image, and that's to create elevation above your horizon line. But there's a little bit of a backstory to this image as well. So in the 1990s, I don't know if you remember, a US photographer by the name of Bob Talbot. And Bob had all these incredible photos out there of dolphins in front of super tankers and whale tails. And Bob took at that stage what I considered to be the benchmark of a whale's tail. And that was of this incredible whale's tail going away from him, where it was lifted clear of the horizon line. He understood the virtues of getting low with a beautiful moody background and then this molten lava-like sea state. So for me, for many years, I used Bob's photo as kind of inspiration to try and capture a similar image, but put my own spin on it. And I thought the only way that I could ever compete, certainly never surpass Bob's image, was to try and have the whale actually be swimming towards me rather than swimming away. Because firstly, that really, establishes two things. One is I always like the fact that the animal is comfortable enough to come close to you, and it shows, I like to think, a certain skill set that you earn an animal's trust for to be able to do that. And then I always think generally an image of an animal moving towards you is a more striking one. So this image was really about 10 or 12 years in the making, where when we started working with the humpback whales, it was a process of discovery, learning how to approach him. And we always had permits to do this, but to approach him to a point where they were comfortable enough to allow us to be close to them, and then very occasionally would swim towards us. And we designed our boat specifically that I could shoot from very low angles, because I learned when I worked with the white sharks how much more impact that creates with an image, rather than shooting down where the shark or the whale's tail would become part of the marine environment. You elevate it above that horizon line, and that really creates a striking impact. And then I guess as my style developed, where I was no longer just trying to create action images, I was trying to bring in a lot of mood and a lot of feeling into my work, really trying to, turn wildlife into art, as it may. I started really putting a lot of emphasis into going out when I knew there would be clouds, when there'd be a lot of mood in the sky, choosing certain sea conditions to shoot under. So it was an image where kind of all of those elements came together. And whether it's as good as Bob's image, I doubt it. But yeah, it's been my best effort to date.
I remember that boat really well, actually. You just reminded me. I remember going out with our mutual friend, Grant Atkinson. We were going out in False Bay, and there's a cutout on the side of the boat, isn't there? So you could lie down flat, and then you're very close to the water, which was really good fun because we had like a megapod of dolphins came past us. So much to photograph there. But you mentioned at the beginning, this is a very positive story. Let's touch on that. What's the positive message here?
Yeah, so, when I first started working with great whites in the early mid-90s, we hardly ever saw humpback whales. Their numbers were so suppressed in the post-industrial whaling era that when we did see a humpback whale, which was a real big deal, we used to, leave the sharks and go try to find this animal that people had seen in False Bay. And then by the early 2000s, the numbers had turned from ones and twos into a little trickle. And now, incredibly, in the 2020s, we can see upwards of 150. And quite remarkably, on the 30th of December last year, my wife and I, we broke the world record of the most individual large whales ever photographed in a single day. So I've experienced the two extremes, from unbelievable pain and loss of an iconic species to seeing what inspired governance and a greater understanding of these animals as sentient creatures and understanding the pivotal role they play in ecosystems can do. So the humpback whale for me really is the quintessential phoenix rising from the ashes, and is a positive news story that we can really use as an example in the marine environment. And while we're on the subjects of the humpbacks, I know I'm talking to an audience now that has a love of nature and a great appreciation of it, but not everybody is like that. A lot of people are, well, it's just an animal in the ocean. But that animal, the humpback whales and other great whales, produce more biological waste as an individual animal than any other species. So all that nutrients that gets released into the ocean is absorbed by a tiny little creature called a phytoplankton. And the phytoplankton use that essentially like plants do as fertilizer, and they sequester carbon and release oxygen. And those tiny little creatures produce 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. So even if you don't like whales, hell, they're bloody important to our future if you like to breathe. And I think it's a great example of, the important roles that these animals play.
That's the message to get across to people, because otherwise it's just incomprehensible, especially to somebody who maybe doesn't live near the ocean, have got no experience of anything beyond their small, blocks of a city living experience. But look, that's a lovely, positive story. So we went downhill for the great whites. We resurfaced like a whale's fluke in black and white back into a story of positivity. It's all going to be okay in the morning. It'll be fine. You just can't give up hope. Okay, we're going to take a quick break now. But before we do that, if you are enjoying the podcast, please leave us a comment down below. Give us a like, subscribe to the channel. Do what you need to do to keep the Google algorithm happy. And then when we come back, Chris and I are going to chat about his third image. We'll see you in a minute. Welcome back to part 2 of the Pangolin Podcast with me, Toby Jermyn, and my guest today, Mr. Chris Fallows. Chris, we are moving on to your third image, please. And guess what? It's another shark. Tell us about this story.
This photograph doesn't have a name, or if it did have a name, I probably couldn't repeat it on a live insert. But what this photograph represents to me is that failure is part of the process. And I spent a very, very, very large part of my life trying to capture the ultimate image of a great white shark naturally catching a seal. Yes, a lot of the documentary work we did was with decoys, and, that was difficult enough. But for me, the essence of what I was doing out there with Monique and the documentary teams was really to capture the natural stuff. And you could learn as much about your subject as you liked, and you could try and always think ahead, but ultimately you had no control over how, in this case, the great white shark would come flying out of the water. And you dream of seeing a white shark of 4.5 meters, because they were incredibly rare animals. And on this particular day, this 4.5 meter huge great white shark must have leapt, I don't know, it's probably 10, 12 foot clear of the water there, completely inverted with a full-grown cow seal, which they also very seldom attack, but it jumped completely away from me. And you might have a breach like that. I would say Monique and I recorded 10,497 predatory events in our time at Seal Island, and you might get one opportunity like that in every 2,500. So wow. There is always a huge degree of luck in what we do. And sometimes the rub of the green is not going to go your way, and failure is part of success. And I always like to look at that image and just say, you've got to be out there to be in it. And if you roll the dice often enough, it will land on the number, but don't be put off when it doesn't.
I think that's a really good story. I was speaking to a client the other day who was a bit miffed that some of their shots came out a bit soft. I said, I'm so sorry. That must be really disappointing. He goes, no, not at all. Now I've got an excuse to come back again. It's absolutely fine.
There you go.
There may be something in the subconscious as well. I'm not going to get this perfect, because if I get it perfect, I've got to stop now. Remind me again. So you did a lot of documentary work. The first people to contact you were Nat Geo, but then you had BBC, didn't you? Planet Earth.
Yeah, we were so lucky. I mean, it had nothing to do with me. I mean, it was everybody wanted to see these flying sharks, and I was kind of the conduit to making that happen. So we did over 100 documentaries, and yeah, we did the 2 Planet Earths, we did Life, we did Africa, Shark, the whole Air Jaws franchise, and it was incredible. You were working with some of the most efficient and knowledgeable natural history crews on the planet. And it was an amazing privilege to not only be able to show them this incredible behavior and showcase our country and these amazing animals, but also to learn from these guys and ladies their craft and learn where they had been and what they found amazing. And it was just incredibly inspiring being with them.
And I seem to remember, I think there was usually at the end of Planet Earth, I think they often have a behind the scenes thing as well. Did they feature behind the scenes? Because there was some really interesting technology that they used to capture the great whites breaching. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so for that segment of Planet Earth, which was shallow seas, the breaching shark was actually the second most successful of all the segments ever shot for Planet Earth. And I think the reason for that was, at the time, we weren't that familiar with ultra slow motion. And it was the first time you really saw a breach that lasted 0.7 of a second slowed down to over a minute in all its incredible detail. And the cameras weren't like they are today, where they refine pieces of technology. In those days, they were using a ballistics camera that was used by the military to essentially look at how a projectile went through a target or whatever the case may be that they were testing. So we had this very rudimentary piece of equipment that looked like something out of Back to the Future on the boat. And then it downloaded to a computer that in those days was far slower than what we have today. So what would happen is they would shoot the breach or whatever it was, then they would shout trigger, and then it took 15 minutes to download. So when we were shooting a breach on a decoy, for example, that was pretty easy, because once the shark had jumped, you'd shout trigger, and then we would be in control of kind of when we put the decoy out or what the next step would be. But when we were shooting the natural predation, which was kind of really what it was all about, they would always say to me while the event was happening, must we trigger? And I remember on one occasion, we got a really good breach, and I said, trigger. And so they started the 15-minute process. And about 10 seconds later, the shark did the most insane stratospheric breach. And I can remember them both looking at me, and I looked the other way. What can you do? But yeah, that was how it worked in those days.
There you go. Never work with children and animals. That's the story, isn't
or me.
It? Like, I think it's an amazing story, because nowadays the photography gear that we have pre-capture. So your keeper rate is there. So it's a shame that the great whites aren't being able to see this behavior so much, because the ability for your clients to capture these images using pre-capture would be extraordinary, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I know I'm getting older is your reflexes get older. And in those early years, when I was in my 20s, when a shark breached, I would often get it while its mouth was still open coming out of the water. But even in the 20-odd years, 25 years I worked with them, by the end, the shark was already at its zenith coming down. And there's no lying in terms of what those photos told you. But yes, having pre-capture, you can imagine, it would have been a game changer. And yeah, there would have been no better subject than shooting the flying great white sharks of False Bay. Yeah.
Well, at least it's protected the intellectual property of your image of there, hasn't it, very conveniently?
If there's one terrible upside, yes, that is true.
There we go. And you've been incredibly successful selling your prints and your work as well. You've got a huge exhibition in Dubai Airport. Is that still going on?
Toby, yes. So, one of the things we really set out to do is to try and reach large audiences with our work. And we were very lucky to be approached by Dubai International Airport. So, we had discussions with them and I said, well, would you be open to bringing in an exhibition that showcased our planet's most iconic animals with a message that's all about the pressures they're under and essentially try and make people around the world aware that A, we live on the most incredible planet, B, these animals are under threat, and C, we need to do everything we can to conserve them. And as signatories to the Buckingham Palace Declaration, which Dubai International is, and that declaration is all about stopping the trafficking of endangered species through aviation hubs, it was a natural fit. And it's the busiest international airport in the world with 100 million people that go through it. So yes, it's an incredible exhibition space. And yes, it's always nice to hear people say, beautiful photo, etc. But it's even nicer to see little kids looking up there with their moms and dads and get a little message and say, my child now really wants to go and see a shark or a dolphin or a lion. And I think that's very important.
Fantastic. 100 million people.
Exactly.
Believe it. Extraordinary. Okay, we are going to change pace a little bit. We're going to move on to your fourth image, which is very, very different. So, Chris, tell us about this image.
When I first started out, Toby, I was all about action photography, and it was very hard not to be. When you've got flying great white sharks, wow. But over time, I realized, it's not just about taking a tight portrait or a set of teeth. It's about trying to tell a story. And firstly, I tried to ever increasingly bring the whole environment into my work. And then it really became a case of trying to bring in artistic elements. So with this image, it's called the Fig and Elephant, and it's taken in Monopools National Park, and it shows a beautiful bull elephant asleep under an incredible ficus tree with a soft background and very little clutter in the foreground. So very much like a washed out watercolor. So most of my work is black and white, and this is one of the works that's on display at Dubai International. One of the exhibitions there is called the 11th Hour, and 11 of the 12 hours are in black and white, kind of symbolizing animals, A, we may have lost, or B, those that are imperiled. But at the end of it, the final hour is all about hope. And as such, this image is in color, although the colors are leaching out of it. And it symbolizes two of Africa's giants, these incredible iconic trees like a ficus that have defied the woodcutter's saw, and this amazing bull elephant that's actually sleeping under this tree that gives it both shade and sustenance. And we do have these incredible sites on our continent, and we have got so much that's worth saving. And really, I feel this is a testimony to the incredible continent we live on, and we're so proud to live on. And I just love the fact that we can still get out there and see these incredible things in today's day and age.
This is one of those images that you can look at for a very long time and you start to notice more and more. And the one thing that my eye keeps going back to is you've got this branch on the left as well, but it's sort of fallen down from the ficus tree, showing there's also an element of fragility as well. It's, this incredibly big, powerful tree. We've got a big, powerful elephant, which just to show how big the bloody tree is. But I think the branch really makes it as well. We've talked about it previously on the show. There's the punctum of an image, which is the unexpected part of the image that really makes you look at it and go, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting that. So there we go. That's my punctum call for the day.
I love your punctum, and you maybe you should do the marketing for my exhibitions, because there's a huge amount of truth in what you said. So Monopools is losing a huge amount of its great trees, and there are various theories for it, from the Mana doesn't flood anymore, and because it doesn't flood, the termites are essentially eating the trees, and the trees are all falling over, to the fact that there may be too many elephants on the floodplains. But the reality remains that Mana is losing many of, and probably will lose most of, its iconic trees. And that branch is just a good example of the fragility of that environment.
So tell me about the technical aspects of the photograph. Did you overexpose at the time of shooting? Were you pushing the exposure a little bit for a higher key image?
Yeah, so everything I shoot nowadays, I have an artistic thought process in mind. I conceptualize an image before I get to a location in relation to the art I'm trying to create. What the animals do, that is left to chance. So yeah, shooting overexposed, probably by at least a full stop in this case. And then the interesting thing with Mana, and for those who've been there in the hottest months of the year, so September, October, early November, you'll know that first thing in the morning, you get this incredible golden light that comes through the trees, and it's like a magic act. But then shortly thereafter, about an hour after sunrise or so, you get this blue haze because it's so darn hot. Then you get a secondary light that for my work is actually even better. So this was probably at around about 7:30 in the morning. And even by that stage, it's getting hot. So the elephants are already starting to stand under trees a little bit. And all of those elements come together to give it kind of that watercolor feel.
This is a print that I assume is in high demand. Do you sometimes, when you're taking a photograph like this, somehow in the back of your mind think, I'm going to shoot it this way because this is going to work really well as a print that somebody's going to want to buy?
Yeah, I'm not a person who takes millions and millions of photographs. I kind of have a good idea of what works and what doesn't. And in a year, I might take 5 photographs that are truly, truly exceptional. So it's one of those things at the time where you see something, you know, I better nail this. And I am always looking at as a large format print. And I just kind of know that clean lead into a subject works really well. And yeah, this particular image works wonderfully as a 1.5 to 1.8 meter wide print. And every time somebody does order this particular work, I love going and looking at it, and I really would love to have one on our own walls at some stage.
Well, there we go. So for all of those of you who bemoan your keeper rate, Chris Fallows keeps 5 images a year. So there we go. That's where you should be aiming for.
Maybe I'm a pretty lousy photographer. There's a lot of opportunities, Toby.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything, Chris. Maybe you're just lucky. Who knows?
Exactly. Rather be lucky than good.
Yeah, there we go. Better to be lucky than good. Hashtag Chris Fallows. Okay, we're going to take a break now. But before we take that break, it's a reminder to please sign up for our Friday Focus newsletter. We'll put a QR code on the screen right now for you to do so. There's a link in the description. This is a weekly newsletter that we send out with all sorts of information about safaris, trip reports, when we're doing new podcasts. So make sure you subscribe to that. It comes out every Friday. Brilliant. Chris, we'll be back in a second for the final part where you're going to share an image taken by another photographer. See you in a second. Welcome back to part 3 of the Pangolin Podcast with my guest today, Chris Fallows. This is the part of the show where we have invited Chris to share with us an image taken by another photographer that he admires, maybe a photograph that he wishes he'd taken himself. So, Chris, who have you chosen as your guest image and why?
Toby, this is a photograph I wish I'd taken myself. It's taken by a famous fine art wildlife photographer called Nick Brandt. And it's taken in Amboseli National Park, and it is of nearly 100 elephants crossing the iconic dry lakes there. And it's a scene that is very, very rare and hard to see today. It's got an incredibly strong bull elephant right at the front of the herd, and then it meanders beautifully into the background. It's got a lovely little bit of mood in the sky, and then that barren landscape really gives a very strong elemental feel to the image. So it's one I would love to, A, have seen that scene transpire before my eyes, and then B, absolutely, I would love to have taken it.
I couldn't agree more. I think the composition is bang on. I think we talked about it previously. You know, you've got to be lucky as well, because the separation of the big bull elephant draws your eye into it. And then the line of elephants going off into the horizon. Really stunning.
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. Like you say, what he's done here, he's climbed probably on top of his vehicle in order to separate the elephants from the end of the lake and the mountain. So they fit perfectly in that landscape. He's then obviously put them in the bottom third of the image. He's got that incredible bull right there near the front of the image that the eye is naturally attracted to. And then it's kind of like reading a book in reverse. Also, you'll notice that there are no Land Rover tracks on the lake. And that is because in those days, you're looking at 2004, there were very few people that even knew about the Great Lakes of Amboseli. So there's so much about this work that would be very hard to replicate. There's so much here that speaks to the skill set of Nick Brandt. And it is for those reasons that I think this is probably the image I'd most like to have in my portfolio.
I think it's one of those images, again, which would lend itself to being printed really big format, wouldn't it?
Yeah, to see this at 3 meters by 1.5, wow, that would really fill a wall beautifully.
I think it really is stunning. Because these lakes, when they dry up, it's 15, 20 kilometers wide when it's super dry, and the elephants have to cross that.
Yeah, the widest part, and they go to the northwestern side to feed in the woodlands, and then they come back to the marshlands on the side closest to Kilimanjaro, and they have these vast landscapes to cross. And you have to be very responsible when you're working with them in this environment, because it is very stressful for them to cross a huge landscape like that. And it's the most amazing thing to see. Incredible.
If you're interested in learning more about Amboseli, we made a video with Janine made a video about Amboseli. It's somewhere that we thoroughly enjoy going to. We go there every year in February. So I'll leave a link in the description down below to go and have a look at that video as well. Okay, Chris, we could probably turn this into a 2-hour podcast, but Bella, the producer, will not be best pleased. She has a life that she needs to get back to and can't be editing forever and ever. So, Chris, before I let you go, we ask all of our guests one question, which is that you are now going to imagine yourself living in a humble dwelling somewhere in the world where you're going to photograph in perpetuity, but you get to decide where is that humble dwelling going to be situated. So tell us where it is.
Well, there are many beautiful places on our planet that offer incredible wildlife opportunities, but if I had to choose one, it would be St. Andrews Bay Beach on South Georgia Island, with its 500,000 odd king penguins, thousands of elephant seals, hanging glaciers, and magnificent landscapes all around. It's a photographer's dream, it's a naturalist's dream, very few people, and a spectacular place to spend your last few days.
We're looking at going to South Georgia, Falklands, and Antarctica in 2028. So when we have all the details of that, Chris, I'll let you know. Maybe you should come with us.
Fantastic, Toby. What a place to go to. And for those who haven't been there, I couldn't think of a better organization than Pangolin to go see one of the most special places on our planet. Make it happen.
That's very, very kind of you. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, Chris, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute joy to reconnect with you. And I look forward to catching up with you next time we're in the same city or town or reserve or wherever. But thank you again for being on the show.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Pangolin Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I'd love to hear your comments and feedback, so please do leave them below. If you're an audio listener, we'd love it if you could give us a star rating or a quick review. And if you don't want to miss the next episode or any of our other wildlife photography videos, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Finally, don't forget to sign up to the Pangolin Photo Safari's Friday Focused newsletter. You can do that by heading over to pangolinphoto.com, or you can scan the QR code on your screen now. I very much look forward to seeing you on a Pangolin Photo Safari soon, and all that's left for me to say is that the Pangolin Podcast was hosted by me, Toby Jermyn, and produced and edited by Bella Falk. Thank you.